Hey all, Lauren Davitt here with another episode of Ask the Experts. Today we're joined by Dr. Hala Sabry, founder of Physicians Moms Group. And there's a lot to talk about today, so let's dive right in. Dr. Sabry, thank you so much for being with us today. First of all, I just want to hear how you're doing. What does work look like for you right now? Are you actively treating COVID-19 patients?
Thank you so much for interviewing me, Lauren. This is such an honor. And I think that COVID is such a hot topic right now. As an emergency medicine physician, I am seeing these patients in the emergency department, but it's been really interesting because over the last 2 months, the types of patients we're seeing and the pattern has changed significantly. And so I have been seeing them. It's been a little bit different and really unexpected.
So your job must be particularly demanding right now. So what are some of the challenges in your work and the challenges that you're facing?
So the challenges I'm facing are twofold. One is that the COVID patients continue to be a little bit confusing in that usually in medicine, we have a lot of data over many years with a lot of trials and studies that show proven and disproven techniques and therapies, but we don't have that right now. And so what physicians are doing and what the government agencies are doing is that they're trying to collect all of this information and give it to us as fast as possible. And even though this information becomes outdated, like for example, some of the things that we were doing a month ago are now not updated treatments that we do now. And so just keeping up with all the information has been challenging, but also exciting because as a physician, it hasn't happened in my career that we've had such a new disease process unfold like this. But the real challenge is the non-COVID patients, actually, because we're ready for the COVID patients and our senses are heightened for the COVID patients. But the non-COVID patients, they're so scared to come to the emergency department, and rightfully so. And sometimes when they come in with what normally would be just a typical abdominal pain, now our differentials are so much more wide because we have to include COVID because COVID has complicated every disease process that, we can think of, or every organ system really. And so that's been the more challenging thing, is really deciding what is COVID and what is not COVID.
That makes total sense. So adding to the challenges for you is that you're a mom of multiple children. So tell us a little bit about this added factor and how your children are processing everything and how you talk to them about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I have 5 children, and my oldest is 6.5. And then I have 2 5-year-olds, and I have 2 almost 2-year-olds. So the 2-year-olds, they kind of, they don't really even talk too much. So I don't really have to explain to them very much about what's going on. But it's interesting that they'll read this in history books and for me to recount my stories. So I've been trying to write them down for them. But the 6 and 5-year-olds, they definitely have an understanding that coronavirus is something that's happening. It's disrupted their lives because they did go to school and now they're doing distant learning. A lot of the early education of coronavirus and kind of letting them know what it was actually done by the school. They came home with already some education, and it was good education. They knew that coronavirus was something that was really contagious. They understood what contagious meant because they understand that normally when one of their brothers or sisters gets sick, that the next one is probably going to catch it from them. So they've experienced that before. So it's kind of a little lesson in immunology. So the school did actually a fantastic job. And what I've been most surprised about my children is their compliance with the shelter in place orders. Like normally on a normal day pre-COVID, my kids are asking me to do 5 million things during the day. We live 20 minutes away from Disneyland. So every day that's on their agenda, even though it's not happening. So whether it's Disneyland, the park, ice cream store, whatever it may be, they're just normal kids. But now they've realized they can't do that anymore. So they definitely have a lot of activities at home to keep them busy. But even when I have to go to the store, or my husband has to go to the store, they're super vigilant to make sure we have a mask, and they're like, don't catch coronavirus. And so if anything, they have a respectful fear of it, which has made it so much easier for me.
It's great that they're modeling those good behaviors at home.
Yeah.
So you founded the Physicians Moms Group. So Tell us a little bit about that and what you're hearing from other women in the group during this time and how the community is supporting each other.
So Physician Moms Group was made about 5.5 years ago when I realized that nobody gave me a class in medical school of how to be a mother or a family member and a doctor. We're just so focused on making physicians that really treat illness, but not realizing that we have to teach them how to live their life afterwards, because going to medical school is kind of like living in a bubble of sorts. So when I got out and I started having children, I started hitting into some obstacles that every working mom has. It's not just about being a doctor, but how do I balance hiring a nanny? How do I balance work and work functions? The balance of having to be 100% a coworker and 100% mom. And I think that a lot of those traditional roles complicate our job, especially being a physician. It's not like a 9-to-5 job. I mean, even if you have an office and you do work 9 to 5, you're taking your work home with you. You are still on call. Patients need, the emergencies happen after 5 o'clock. And so I made this group really thinking that maybe 20 people might be interested in being vulnerable and saying that they didn't know how to handle this. But it turns out that many women physicians felt similar, or even felt that they had pearls of wisdom that they wanted to share as well. So the group has now grown tremendously, and the original group of Physician Moms Group is almost 74,000 people right now. But when the pandemic started, one of the things that I realized was that it was going to be big, and it was going to take a lot of space that was needed to be dedicated towards discussion. And my fear was, that the pandemic would kind of shift our focus where we wouldn't be able to talk about, gender issues and women empowerment. So what we decided to do is we decided to make a space for COVID. Well, the second group actually feels and looks very different. In the COVID group, I actually had a chance to organize it in a way that would allow us to transmit information in a really efficient manner. And so that group is really clinical. It's very focused. It's very educational. There's no messing around. And we get work done there. We have weekly lectures by specialists that are at the top of their field to give us updates, current updates in COVID as it affects their field, whether it's, intensive care, dermatology, radiology, it's affecting every body part and every system, as I mentioned before. So it does feel and look different. And early on, one of the things that was so surprising to me is that the male physicians wanted into the group. And I obviously, wanted to invite them because the whole goal of education is to get everybody educated on this. So we actually opened up our criteria to men for that group as well. And that group, although it's only 2 months old, is up to 40,000 people. So it's been a real good resource. And like I mentioned, we don't have books written on COVID yet, and we don't have, a plethora of studies that have been replicated and not outdated. So right now we're learning from each other.
That's so wonderful. And one of the things that, we're hearing about is the mental toll this is taking on frontline healthcare workers. Is that coming up in either of the groups as tied to this?
Oh, it's coming up in both groups. Definitely, it's been interesting as an admin of a group to see the difference of the mental and health care 8 weeks ago than now. 8 weeks ago, a lot of the conversations generally were anxiety driven about, we don't know what this is. We don't know how to protect our communities. I mean, that's our job. Our job is to make sure that everybody is as safe as possible. And the way medicine works is, preventative care. So any type of antidote or preventative treatment, immunization, anything to prevent such outbreak is, our first, kind of layer of ammunition, and we don't have that. So that's been taken away from us. And now not only are people contracting this disease, but they're dying at high rates. At least for medicine, they're dying in high rates. And so for us, it was a lot of anxiety to prepare as best as we could, because we knew that it was going to come through and it was going to be devastating, but we didn't want it to be as devastating as it possibly could. So all the early conversations were, how do we protect our patients? How do we protect our family? And as COVID started coming through, we started learning from the doctors that were in hotspots. So the doctors in Italy were communicating with us and kind of giving us their recounts. The doctors in New York and New Orleans, they started kind of telling us what they're seeing. And it started to give us that preparation, even though it's really just word of mouth and anecdotal stories, but that's all we had at that point. And now it's a little bit different because physicians at this point, we're kind of double victims. And I think that's what I'm kind of seeing here. As physicians, we're also victims because I think that as every industry is affected, most of the public don't think that the medical industry is affected because it's the most utilized, it's essential, but not realizing that it's actually affecting us. And personally, I've had my shifts cut, and I don't mind it because I would rather have my shifts cut than people die. But at the same time, it's just reality. I mean, everybody's shifts are cut, every physician. And so I think that when the public realizes that and realizes that despite that, most physicians are saying, let's keep the shelter in place order. If we could just do this just for a little bit longer, maybe we can just get over this and we can prevent the chances of continuing this wave and the second and third waves that might come, So it's been a little bit confusing. I don't think that we've been in this situation ever.
Certainly. So switching gears just a little bit, you've traveled to the field with UNICEF and you've seen UNICEF's response efforts firsthand. So how do you feel about, the families that you saw on your visit and the frontline health workers that you saw on your visit and how they might be juggling the pandemic and other needs on the ground?
Yeah, I'm actually so glad you asked this question because ironically, right before this pandemic was actually called a pandemic, about a week or two before, it was a time that I was planning with UNICEF on a trip to Namibia. So I was actually supposed to be in Namibia in March. And obviously that trip got canceled, but the conversations with the UNICEF organizers on that call or right after the call was, hey, we really should be careful. I know that this disease process right now is only in China and Italy, but who's to say that all of the help that we want to bring to the region we're going to can actually be really devastating for them, especially when they don't have the infrastructure of a healthcare system like some of these other countries that are being affected. And so that was a conversation that I personally had with UNICEF, which UNICEF was already having those conversations. So it was nice to be somewhat included in those. So we actually we did the responsible thing. We canceled the trip. And since then, honestly, I've just been thinking about everyone that I've ever met, on my trip. Oftentimes when I sit here and I think about even all of the uncertainty that we have here, I can't even imagine what the uncertainty is that they have there, and especially when we talk about preventative treatments, and for them to be already seeking those resources for preventative treatments that already exist. It makes me feel even more inspired to make sure that that the healthcare is equitable around the world.
And you mentioned immunizations as one of those preventative measures, and your group has been very supportive of UNICEF's immunization programs in the past. So can you tell us about how the COVID-19 pandemic sort of underscores the importance of these programs?
So, I know COVID is not affected by tetanus or vice versa, but like I mentioned, I hope just like women equity issues and, gender parity and whatnot, I hope that the issues of preventative care and tetanus vaccinations are not pushed to the side either, because these are all equally important. I think that people shouldn't be dying from preventable disease. I think everybody agrees with that. And so I hope that the conversations still continue as to how we can still help other people around the world outside of COVID.
Definitely. We can't let those other issues fall to the wayside in the meantime. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Sabry.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for another episode of Ask the Experts next week.